The shopping center's parking lot lay silent, like a forgotten wasteland. Yellow light from the tall lampposts cast faint beams, illuminating scattered cars on the cold concrete. The heavy footsteps of Officer Michael Hayes echoed through the stillness, each stride like a hammer blow on the cement, shattering the night's fragile silence. Olivia Parker stood beside her silver-gray truck, wearing a faded reflective vest and neatly pressed uniform pants. Under the glow of the lights, her face appeared weary yet resolute. She had just finished a long day inspecting the mall's outdated fire suppression system and was loading bulky equipment into the truck. Shiny fire extinguishers, complex toolkits, and technical documents were neatly arranged. She was used to nights like this, alone in a vast space, hearing only the clank of metal tools colliding and the wind whistling through gaps in the overhead covering. But tonight, the atmosphere felt different. Something subtle and unsettling crept through the air, sending a chill up Olivia's spine. Michael approached, his right hand hovering near his belt, close to where he kept his gun and baton. His cold, piercing gaze bore into Olivia, as though trying to see through her exterior and uncover something suspicious. "Good evening. What are you doing here?" Michael asked, his voice low and authoritative. Olivia looked up, her brown eyes meeting Michael's suspicious stare. She neither flinched nor backed away. As a fire safety specialist, she was no stranger to tense situations. "I just finished checking the fire suppression system in this mall," Olivia replied, her tone calm but firm. "I'm packing up my equipment to head home." Michael glanced over at the equipment in the truck. Large fire extinguishers, heavy metal toolboxes, and carefully wrapped paperwork. To him, all of it carried a big question mark. "Prove it," Michael growled, tightening his grip on his belt. "Do you have any documentation that says you're allowed to be here at this hour?" Olivia exhaled, taking a small step back, careful not to let herself lose composure. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out an employee ID card along with a stack of documents. "This is my employee badge. I work for Metro Fire Safety Consultants. If you need confirmation, I can call the mall management." Michael took the badge, his gray-blue eyes scanning the printed details. But instead of handing it back immediately, he held on to it, his gaze still fixed on Olivia. "These documents don't prove anything," Michael said, his voice ice-cold. "Anyone could fake an ID like this. Even your uniform isn't anything special." Olivia narrowed her eyes, irritation swelling within her. She had encountered many police officers during her work, and most of them behaved professionally and respectfully. But Michael was different. There was something off in his gaze, a pent-up anger, a hidden bitterness. "Officer Hayes, I've been fully cooperative," Olivia said, her voice low but clear. "I've provided the necessary paperwork and information. If you still don't believe me, you can call the mall management or request another officer to come here." Michael let out a derisive smirk. There was no humor in that smile, only mockery and chill. "I don't need anyone else," Michael said, each word landing like a knife cutting through the air. "I'm perfectly capable of handling this situation." Their eyes locked, the tension between them stretched taut like a string about to snap. Michael took another step, leaving only a few feet between them. Olivia's heart pounded faster, but she didn't back down. "You're overstepping your authority," Olivia said, her voice growing sharper. "I haven't done anything wrong, and you have no right to abuse your power to harass me." Olivia's words were like a direct blow to Michael's fragile pride. His eyes flared with rage, and in a momentary lapse of control, he grabbed a nearby fire extinguisher at Olivia's feet. "What are you doing?" Olivia exclaimed, stepping back. But it was too late. Michael squeezed the trigger of the fire extinguisher, releasing a burst of white foam that engulfed Olivia's face and body. She stumbled, her eyes burning, unable to open them fully. Michael stood there, extinguisher in hand, breathing heavily. His eyes were filled with shock, as though he couldn't believe what he had just done. But that moment was enough for Olivia to react. With a swift movement, Olivia yanked the extinguisher from Michael's grip, spun around and pulled the trigger, sending foam spraying right into his face. Michael staggered back, coughing, his eyes squeezed shut as the foam coated his skin. "You've made a big mistake, Michael," Olivia said, her voice low but steady. Michael stood frozen, trying to wipe the foam from his eyes. In that moment, all the false authority he had tried to project dissolved. The parking lot fell silent, broken only by the labored breathing of Michael and Olivia echoing across the vast space. The air in the parking lot seemed to congeal into an invisible fog, heavy and suffocating. Foam from the fire extinguisher dripped onto the concrete, mingling with the harsh gasps of both Michael and Olivia. They stood a few steps apart, their eyes locked in a tense moment, like a tightly wound string about to snap. Olivia, her face and uniform splattered with white foam, remained standing straight, gripping the fire extinguisher as if it were a protective shield. Her breathing was steady, her eyes alight with a restrained but resolute anger. She was no longer a victim here. Michael, his face red with fury and confusion, blinked away the foam that clung to his lashes. He wiped it from his face with a rough motion, taking a deep breath to regain his composure. But his breathing was unsteady, and he knew the situation had spiraled beyond his control. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" Michael growled, his voice gravelly and edged with a fear he couldn't quite hide. Olivia didn't answer immediately. She slowly set the fire extinguisher on the ground, her gaze never leaving the officer in front of her. "You've crossed the line, Michael," Olivia said, her tone calm yet unyielding. "I cooperated. I showed you my documentation. I was patient. But this, using violence to overpower me?" Michael swallowed hard, his lips twitching as though he wanted to speak, but he stayed silent. A swirl of memories hit him, times in the past when he'd overstepped his authority and had to deal with the fallout. But this time, Olivia's unwavering stance changed everything. She wasn't crying or screaming. She wasn't cowering in fear. She stood there, solid as a fortress. A faint breeze swept through the parking lot, bringing with it the smell of fire extinguisher foam and the chill of night. Michael took a small step backward, his hands still hovering near his belt. Yet now it was no longer the gesture of someone in control. It was hesitation, like a man perched precariously between right and wrong. "Officer Hayes," Olivia continued, her voice softer but still firm, "you need to think very carefully about what you're doing. You had the chance to handle this situation in a professional manner. Instead, you chose oppression and violence. Why? What are you afraid of?" That final question cut straight to Michael's core. Afraid of what? He asked himself. Afraid of being disrespected? Afraid of losing the only fragile sense of power he still clung to? Or afraid that Olivia was truly right and he was wrong? Michael blinked and turned his head away, avoiding Olivia's gaze. The silence between them stretched on, thick and uncomfortable. "Officer Hayes, I suggest you call for backup," Olivia said, her eyes reflecting the weak, yellowish glow of the overhead lights. "If you want to handle this situation properly, this is your last chance." Michael raised a hand, stopping Olivia from continuing. But the gesture was feeble and hesitant. He sighed, his shoulders sagging as though a massive weight pressed down on them. "I don't need anyone," Michael mumbled, his voice barely above a whisper. In that moment, memories flooded Michael's mind like a rushing tide. He remembered the night his wife packed her bags and left, their young son peeking out from behind the bedroom door, tears in his eyes. He remembered the look on his supervisor's face when he messed up a crucial raid. Those contemptuous looks, the words that still haunted him. "You're a liability, Michael." All of it had led him here, to this deserted parking lot, facing an innocent woman, letting his anger and insecurity take the reins. I don't know why I did that," Michael murmured, his voice cracking. Olivia looked at him, a flicker of compassion crossing her face. It wasn't pity, it was understanding. She recognized that Michael was trapped in a dark spiral he might not escape on his own. "You can make this right, Michael," Olivia said gently. "Call for backup. Do your job the right way. You can start over." Michael bowed his head, his arms hanging limply at his sides, his shoulders trembling. He looked like a statue crumbling piece by piece. Looked like a statue crumbling piece by piece. Suddenly, a police siren echoed across the wide expanse of the parking lot, piercing the midnight stillness. Red and blue lights whirled, reflecting off the drab concrete walls and illuminating the strained features of Michael Hayes. Olivia Parker stood motionless, her eyes still fixed on the visibly shaken officer before her. The police car pulled up a few yards away. A tall, young officer stepped out from the driver's seat. On his chest, a name tag gleamed under the lights. Officer Daniel Reyes. "What's going on here, Hayes?" Reyes asked, his voice calm but tinged with suspicion. His eyes flicked over Olivia. The white foam splattered on the ground from the fire extinguisher, and Michael's flushed face. Michael didn't answer immediately. He hesitated, hands clenched at his sides. In that moment, he looked like a child caught in the act of doing something wrong. Olivia, who was still remarkably composed, took a step forward, her gaze steady but not defiant. "Officer Reyes, I'm Olivia Parker, a fire safety specialist with Metro Fire Safety Consultants. I was finishing up an inspection of the mall's fire suppression system. Officer Hayes behaved inappropriately. He suspected I was doing something illegal and used unnecessary force." Reyes frowned, his eyes darting once more to Michael, now filled with disappointment and a hint of surprise. "Hayes, what's this about? She showed you documentation, right?" Reyes asked, his tone growing more severe. Michael stammered, his lips trembling. His eyes roamed around the parking lot as though searching for an excuse. She had some suspicious-looking equipment. "I was just doing my job, Reyes," Michael said, his voice sounding like he was clinging to the last scraps of pride. Reyes raised a hand, cutting off Michael's weak explanation. "And that includes spraying a fire extinguisher in an innocent woman's face?" Reyes asked, his voice sharp. Michael lowered his head, shoulders slumped as though he carried the weight of the world. Reyes turned back to Olivia, his expression regretful. "Miss Parker, are you all right? Do you need an ambulance or any other assistance?" Olivia shook her head. "I'm fine, Officer Reyes. I just want to finish up and leave here safely." Reyes nodded, then turned to Michael. "Hayes, hand over your radio." Michael hesitated for a moment, but then removed the radio from his belt and handed it to Reyes. It was the kind of moment where everything seemed to freeze. In Michael's eyes, something shattered, a late realization that he had gone too far, that there was no turning back. While Reyes stepped aside to report the situation to dispatch, Olivia and Michael remained under the pale yellow lights, the space between them thick with silence. Neither spoke, and the quiet between them felt like a chasm too vast to cross. Michael stared down at his scuffed black shoes. A flood of thoughts crashed into him like pounding waves. His wife's face as she walked out, his son's tearful eyes watching his parents argue, and his superior's biting words at his last disciplinary hearing. "Why did I do this?" he wondered silently. Olivia looked at Michael. Gone were the anger and fear in her eyes, replaced by a deep fatigue. "Officer Hayes," Olivia said softly, "we all have moments of weakness. The important thing is knowing when to stop. You've gone too far, but it's not too late." Michael raised his head, his eyes bloodshot. I've ruined everything, my career, my family, all of it. I've lost myself." Olivia nodded slowly. "But you still have a chance to make it right. You can still do the right thing now." Her words echoed in Michael's mind like a desperate plea. Part of him wanted to believe she was right, that there was still a chance to redeem himself. Reyes returned with the radio in hand. "Hayes, you're coming back to the station with me. There will be a full investigation into what happened here." Michael nodded weakly. He didn't argue, didn't try to justify himself anymore. He simply nodded and made his way toward the patrol car. Olivia watched Michael's retreating figure. He moved like a man who had lost all hope. Yet in her eyes there was a faint glimmer of optimism. Perhaps somewhere inside him there was still a tiny fragment of honesty and humanity. Reyes turned back to Olivia. "Miss Parker, I sincerely apologize for what happened. I'll make sure this situation is handled fairly." Olivia nodded. "Thank you, Officer Reyes. I hope this never happens to anyone else." Reyes gave Olivia a brief salute before walking away. The patrol car's engine started, and it carried Michael off into the night. Olivia remained alone in the parking lot, where silence finally returned. As Olivia shut her truck door and started the engine, she glanced in the rearview mirror. The tall yellow lamps still shone brightly, but there were no more threatening shadows lurking about. Only she and the road ahead remained. A sense of relief washed over Olivia, tinged with deep reflection. She knew not everyone was inherently bad, and sometimes people were simply victims of their own misguided choices. The truck rolled forward, its motor humming softly into the night. Olivia left the parking lot behind, taking with her the night's story, a story of power, control, and the flicker of hope that can emerge even in the darkest moments. After a long silence, Michael exhaled and slipped a hand into his pocket, pulling out his radio. He raised it close to his mouth, but his trembling finger hovered over the transmit button. Olivia didn't look away for a second. She knew this was a pivotal moment, one that could change both of their lives. "I'll call it in," Michael said, his voice laden with exhaustion. But just then, a siren blared in the distance, its red and blue lights flashing at the far end of the parking lot. Michael and Olivia both turned toward the approaching cruiser. Olivia let out a quiet sigh of relief, but Michael froze. His face went pale, as though his very soul had departed. "Now this will all be sorted out," Olivia said, her gaze resolute. Michael remained motionless, letting the radio slip from his grasp. It struck the concrete with a hollow, echoing thud. The air in the parking lot felt frozen in place. Echoes of Michael's baseless accusations still reverberated in Olivia's mind. Under the dim yellow lights, her face showed both shock and disappointment. She had encountered suspicion before, but never with such an overt threat. Michael Hayes stood there, his hand near his belt, fingers brushing the holster unconsciously. His gaze seemed to bore into Olivia, searching for something that didn't exist, a sign that she was lying, a suspicious gesture, anything that could justify his actions. "Officer Hayes," Olivia said, her voice steady but tinged with fatigue. "I've explained everything clearly. I've shown you my paperwork. I don't understand why you continue to doubt me. A fire extinguisher is a safety device, not a weapon." Michael forced a smile, one utterly devoid of humor. "You think I'm naive enough to believe everything you say? I've seen too many situations like this. Criminals posing as legitimate workers to cover up their crimes." Olivia closed her eyes briefly, taking a deep breath to stay calm. She realized that any attempt to explain herself would fall on deaf ears. He wasn't looking for the truth. He was looking for a reason to exert power. "So what do you intend to do now, Officer Hayes?" Olivia asked, her voice low and deliberate. "Are you going to arrest me? Are you going to charge me over these fire extinguishers and toolkits? I've cooperated from the start, but you insist on taking this further." Michael blinked, his lips pressed tightly together. Olivia's words echoed in his mind like an accusation, but also like a wake-up call. For a fleeting moment, he sensed the absurdity of his actions. But his wounded pride and pent-up anger pushed him another step closer to the edge. "I don't need you telling me what to do," Michael said, his tone lowered, as though he was trying to convince himself more than Olivia. "I'm just doing my job. You have no idea the pressure I'm under." Michael backed up a few steps, his eyes drifting into empty space. In his head, flashes of the past unspooled like a damaged film reel, a botched pursuit that let the suspect get away. His supervisor's disappointed face when handing down disciplinary action. His wife's shouts late at night, "You're going to lose everything if you don't change, Michael." The anger burning inside him wasn't truly aimed at Olivia, but at himself. Yet Olivia was the one standing before him, an easy target on whom he could unload all the bitterness he had been repressing for so long. Olivia sensed the hesitation in Michael's eyes. She looked at him, her own gaze reflecting empathy but not weakness. "Officer Hayes," she said, her voice gentle but firm. "I'm not your enemy. I'm not here for you to vent your anger on. I just want to do my job and leave here safely. But right now, your actions aren't just threatening me. They're threatening you too." Michael took a deep breath, his shoulders sagging under a weight that seemed impossibly heavy. Silence stretched between them, broken only by the wind, whistling through gaps in the overhead covering and the distant clang of metal. Olivia never took her eyes off Michael. She knew that one wrong move could turn this situation into a tragedy. Michael's hand trembled slightly as he unclipped his radio from his belt. Olivia held her breath. Maybe he was about to call for backup. Maybe he had realized his mistake. But no. Michael hurled the radio to the ground, and the sharp crack of it shattering echoed through the quiet. Olivia flinched, her eyes widening at Michael's outburst. "No one's coming," Michael shouted, his voice cracking with panic and despair. "It's just you and me. I'll handle this my way." Olivia felt the blood in her veins turn cold. This was no longer a simple argument. It had turned into a dangerous situation. "Officer Hayes, you need to calm down," Olivia said, her tone steady but her eyes flashing with caution. "You don't have to do this. Stop before things get worse." Michael stood there, his breathing ragged. He stared at Olivia, and in that moment, she saw not just anger in his eyes but a profound, consuming fear. Footsteps echoed from somewhere in the distance. Someone was approaching, maybe a security guard or just a passerby who had wandered into the parking lot. Olivia realized this might be her only chance. "Officer Hayes, we don't have to do this," Olivia said one last time, her voice slow and measured. "You can still do the right thing." Michael stood still, his arms hanging at his sides, fingers trembling. Olivia held her breath, waiting for his reaction. In the darkness, headlights from another vehicle illuminated Michael's face. He closed his eyes, and for a moment, time seemed to stop. The vast parking lot was engulfed in an eerie silence. Pale yellow lamps cast their glow, painting the shadows of Olivia and Michael onto the cold concrete. The distant sound of footsteps echoed from the far end of the lot, seeming to draw closer. Both Olivia and Michael heard it, but each reacted in their own way. Olivia remained still, her hand tightening slightly at her side, her sharp brown eyes never leaving Michael. She didn't want to provoke him, but she also couldn't allow this situation to escalate. She sensed the fragility in the officer before her. Michael was on the brink of collapse, and the slightest spark could set off a tragedy. Michael stood there, his gaze wavering between anger and fear. His fingers twitched near his belt where his gun remained holstered. His face was flushed, his breathing rapid. He knew he was losing control, but part of him couldn't stop. Part of him still craved the assertion of power, the power he had lost so long ago. "Michael," Olivia said, calling him by name this time, her voice low and gentle yet firm. "We can end this now. No one has to get hurt. No one has to lose their career or their life. Let me go, and you can walk away without any regrets." Olivia's words echoed in Michael's mind like a distant bell. He wanted to believe her, but the ghosts of his past, his mistakes, his failures, weighed heavily on his shoulders. He looked at Olivia, and for an instant, a flicker of hope lit his eyes. But then, the footsteps grew closer, pulling him back to reality. "No, I can't let you go," Michael shouted, his voice cracking. "I can't lose control again." His hand moved slightly closer to his weapon, and Olivia sensed the situation veering toward disaster. But before anything could happen, a voice called out from afar, "Michael, what the hell are you doing?" Another police officer stepped out of the darkness, Officer Daniel Reyes, whom Olivia had met before. He quickly approached, his sharp gaze passing over Olivia before settling on Michael's flushed face. "Care to explain this, Michael?" Reyes asked, his tone biting. Michael froze. His hand dropped from his belt and his shoulders sagged. He opened his mouth to speak, but no sound came out. His eyes were filled with confusion, fear, and finally, shame. Olivia exhaled in relief. She looked over at Reyes, gratitude shining in her eyes. Reyes stepped between Olivia and Michael, as though building an invisible wall between them. "Miss Parker, are you all right?" Reyes asked, his voice gentler as he turned to her. "I'm fine, Officer Reyes," Olivia replied, her tone calm despite her racing heartbeat. Reyes nodded, then turned to Michael. "Michael, what were you thinking? This is an innocent woman just doing her job. You have no right to act like this." Michael hung his head, his shoulders trembling. He couldn't meet the eyes of either Reyes or Olivia. I thought, I don't know," Michael mumbled. I just wanted to control the situation." Reyes sighed, shaking his head. "Michael, this isn't about control anymore. You've crossed the line, and you know it." Michael looked up, his eyes red and brimming with tears. "I've lost everything already, Reyes. My family, my career. I only wanted to do something right, but I ruined it all." A silence fell over the three of them. Olivia looked at Michael, and all her anger had faded away. Only compassion remained. She realized she wasn't just facing a disgraced officer, but a man teetering between right and wrong, between past and present. "Michael," Reyes said more gently, "you can still make this right, but you have to accept the consequences of your actions. It's the only way you can find yourself again." Michael nodded, his shoulders slumping completely. He knew the road ahead would be difficult, but he also knew he couldn't go on like this. Reyes turned to Olivia. "Miss Parker, I'm truly sorry for what happened. I'll personally file a report on this incident with my superiors." Olivia nodded, empathy shining in her eyes. "Thank you, Officer Reyes. I hope this will serve as a lesson for all of us." Reyes nodded, then motioned for Michael to head toward the police cruiser parked at the far end of the lot. Michael walked off slowly, looking like a man who had lost everything, yet also like someone who had glimpsed a small light in the midst of overwhelming darkness. Olivia remained alone in the parking lot. She glanced around, no longer feeling threatened or afraid. A light night breeze swept through, carrying the chill of the late hour. She returned to her truck, settled into the driver's seat, and drew in a deep breath. Looking in her rearview mirror, she watched the police lights gradually disappear as they drove away. The peaceful evening she had hoped for hadn't materialized, but perhaps she had done something more important, something not everyone would have been able to do. Her truck's engine turned over, carrying Olivia away from the mall parking lot and onto a road stretching under a star-filled sky. Though she was exhausted, a spark of hope glowed within her that somehow things would turn out all right. The night sky remained a deep black as Olivia Parker drove away from the shopping center's lot. The steady hum of her truck filled the still air. Her hands gripped the steering wheel, her eyes fixed on the road ahead. But her mind lingered on the deserted parking lot where her confrontation with Michael Hayes had just ended. Olivia sighed, feeling her shoulders relax bit by bit. She had done everything in her power to keep the situation from spinning out of control. Yet the events of this evening would remain etched into her memory. Not just because of the danger she had faced, but because of what she had seen in Michael's eyes. It wasn't simply rage or power. It was pain, desperation. Her cell phone vibrated on the dashboard. A quick glance at the screen told her it was Rachel, director of Metro Fire Safety Consultants. Olivia switched on speakerphone and pressed accept. "Olivia, are you all right?" came Rachel's anxious voice. Reyes gave his report. "I can't believe what I just heard." "I'm fine, Rachel. It's all under control now, but it wasn't easy." Rachel let out a sigh over the phone. "I'm sorry you had to go through that. But Olivia, you handled the situation wonderfully. Not everyone can stay calm and in control in a situation like that." "Thank you," Olivia said, her voice trailing off. "But, Michael, he's not entirely a bad person. He's just lost." Rachel was silent for a moment. "I understand. Sometimes the weakest people end up doing the worst things. But this matter still needs to be addressed thoroughly. I'll be keeping a close eye on the case. Go home and rest, Olivia. You've done enough." "Yes, thank you, Rachel." When the call ended, Olivia took a deep breath, staring out the window into the darkness. She needed to get home, wash off the stress of the evening, and allow herself to decompress after such a tense night. Meanwhile, Michael Hayes sat alone in the officer's break room at the local police station. His uniform jacket lay draped over the back of a chair. His face was pale, his eyes vacant as he stared at the dull gray wall. Officer Daniel Reyes stood out in the hallway, looking in through the glass panel. Reyes sighed. He knew Michael had gone too far, but he still felt a twinge of sympathy. Pushing open the door, Reyes walked in and sat down across from Michael. "Michael, you have to face the consequences. You know that, right?" Michael nodded, but his gaze stayed fixed on the floor. "I don't know what I was doing, Reyes. Everything just got so messed up. I wanted to control the situation, but then it slipped right through my fingers." Reyes leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms over his chest. "Power isn't something you can seize through force or threats. You did wrong, but you still have a chance to make it right. Cooperate with the investigation. Be honest." Michael closed his eyes, his lips trembling. "I've already lost everything, Reyes. My wife, my son, and now my career." Reyes shook his head with a weary sigh. There's still one thing you can salvage, Michael. Your dignity. Don't let this mistake consume you completely. Rising to his feet, Reyes patted Michael's shoulder before leaving the room. Michael remained there alone, mulling over Reyes's words. Olivia's final words echoed in his mind. You can still do the right thing. A few days later, Olivia received an email from the city police department inviting her to testify at a hearing concerning Michael Hayes' misconduct. Sitting at her computer, she hovered her fingers over the keyboard. What should I do? She wondered to herself. Part of her wanted to leave it all behind and move on with her life. But another part refused to let it be swept under the rug. Finally, she clicked and selected Confirm Attendance. The hearing room at the station was packed with people. Senior officers, lawyers, and investigators were all present. Michael Hayes sat at the hearing table, looking haggard and worn down. He no longer projected that arrogance or authority from that night. Olivia entered the room, and all eyes turned to her. She took her seat in the witness chair, drew a deep breath, and recounted everything that had happened. She described each detail and emotion with a calm but determined voice. When the hearing ended, Michael stood up, bowing his head toward Olivia. Thank you, Olivia, for not letting that situation end worse than it did. Olivia gave a slight nod. Everyone deserves a chance to make things right, Michael. Don't waste yours. A few weeks later, Olivia returned to her usual work routine. Empty parking lots and outdated fire suppression systems were once again part of her daily life. But she was different now. Stronger, more vigilant, yet also more compassionate. Michael Hayes was placed on suspension, but he began attending counseling sessions and volunteering in programs that assist officers suffering from trauma. It was a small start, but it was the right direction. Olivia parked in another lot, the distant sky painted red by the setting sun. She got out of her truck, carrying her familiar toolkit on her shoulder. Life went on, but this time, she held on to the hope that confrontations like the one that night would happen. A metallic clang rang out across the empty parking lot as the fire extinguisher hit the cold concrete. A burst of white powder erupted, obscuring the view for both Olivia and Michael. The air was thick with the fine chemical dust seeping into their lungs and stinging their eyes. Olivia coughed and staggered back a few steps to get away from the spreading cloud. She raised a hand to cover her mouth and nose, her eyes stinging but never leaving Michael's shaky form. He stood amid the swirling powder, his hands trembling as though trying to steady himself in an invisible storm. "Michael, stay calm," Olivia shouted through the thick haze. But Michael couldn't hear her. He, too, was coughing uncontrollably, eyes bloodshot from the chemicals. His hands trembled, drained of strength. His shoulders slumped, as though every last scrap of power, every last thread of authority he had clung to, had vanished with the billowing white dust. In that moment, Michael's mind went blank, and old memories flooded in like a reel of black and white film in slow motion. His ex-wife's tear-streaked face as she walked out the door, their young son at her side. The knock on his supervisor's office door, where he heard that cold verdict. "You've messed up everything, Hayes. This is your last chance." His co-workers' faces when he walked into the meeting, their eyes filled with pity and distance. Michael sank to his knees, pressing his hands over his face. He remained still in the swirling white haze, like a shattered statue. "What have I done?" he murmured, his voice barely audible. Olivia recognized that this was her last chance to keep the situation from spiraling completely out of control. She stepped closer to Michael, slowly, hands raised in a non-threatening posture. "Michael, listen to me. You don't need to go on like this. Put everything down. You don't have to fight me or yourself anymore." Michael lifted his head, tears filling his eyes. He looked at Olivia, and in that instant, all the anger, fear, and insecurity in his gaze seemed to vanish. He was just a wounded man, trapped in the whirlwind of failure and regret. I don't even know what I've done anymore. Michael, you can make this right, but first, you need to stop. Let go of everything. Let me help you." A police siren blared in the distance. Both Olivia and Michael heard it. The swirling red and blue lights pierced the white haze of extinguisher powder, signaling that help was on the way. Michael glanced at Olivia, then at the approaching lights. He staggered to his feet, shoulders trembling, and finally gave in. He raised his hands in surrender, his eyes fixed on Olivia, filled with exhaustion and remorse. I'm sorry, Michael whispered. Olivia nodded, tears glistening in her eyes. She said nothing else. She simply stood there, watching as Michael accepted his defeat. This wasn't just a small failure, this was the complete collapse of a man who had lost everything, yet in that moment, also found a path to start over. 2 police cars sped into the parking lot, headlights flooding the area. Officers jumped out, weapons drawn, but when they saw Michael, a fellow officer standing with his hands raised, they paused. "Drop your weapon, hands up and don't move," one officer shouted. Olivia lifted her own hands, stepping back to avoid worsening the situation. "It's all right. He's not a threat anymore," Olivia called out. Reyes was the first to emerge from one of the cars. When he saw Michael in such dire condition, his eyes filled with sympathy. "Michael," Reyes said quietly. Michael didn't speak. He just gave a small nod. Reyes approached and cautiously put handcuffs on him, doing so without force or aggression. They all understood Michael was no longer dangerous. Olivia sat on the hood of her truck, holding a bottle of water handed to her by another officer. She took a sip, watching the police car carrying Michael pull out of the lot. Reyes walked over to her, his hands in his jacket pockets. "Miss Parker, are you all right?" he asked. Olivia nodded. "Yes. Thank you for getting here in time, Officer Reyes." Reyes sighed, gazing toward the police car disappearing in the distance. "Michael isn't a bad guy, you know? He's just lost. He let his anger and insecurities take over." "I know," Olivia said, her voice gentle yet firm. "I could see it in his eyes, but not everyone gets the chance to redeem themselves." Reyes nodded, his expression thoughtful. "You did well tonight, Olivia. Not everyone can keep a clear head in a situation like that. I'll personally make sure this report is handled fairly." Olivia managed a faint, weary smile. "Thank you, Reyes." Standing up, she stretched and walked over to her truck. Far off in the distance, the black sky was beginning to give way to the pale gray light of dawn. When Olivia's truck finally pulled out of the parking lot, she felt a strange sense of relief. Tonight, she had stood firm in the face of a situation that could have easily spun out of control. She had witnessed one man's downfall, but also the moment he glimpsed a chance for hope. The first rays of morning light peeked over the horizon, shining on the road ahead. Olivia drove on, leaving the chaotic night behind her, carrying with her a story she would never forget. The sun climbed higher in the sky, casting pale yellow beams on roads still damp from a tense night. Olivia Parker sat in a wooden chair in the Metro Fire Safety Consultant's office, staring at the steaming cup of black coffee before her. The strong aroma filled the quiet space, and the events of the previous night played vividly in her mind, as though they had happened only minutes ago. Rachel Carter, director of Metro Fire Safety Consultants, stepped into the office. She was a strong woman with short, dark brown hair and sharp yet warm eyes. Holding a thick folder, she placed it on the table in front of Olivia. "Are you all right, Olivia?" Rachel asked, her voice low and concerned. Olivia looked up, giving a tired but genuine smile. "I'm okay, Rachel. I'm just still thinking about what happened." Rachel sat down across from Olivia, clasping her hands together. "We received the official report from the police department. Michael Hayes has been suspended and will face an internal investigation." Olivia nodded slowly, though her face showed little relief. "He's not a bad person, you know, I think he got stuck in a cycle of failure and self-doubt. But the way he reacted, it could have made things so much worse." Rachel sighed, leaning back in her chair. "Olivia, you did the right thing. You stayed calm, stood your ground, and kept the situation from escalating. No one can blame you for what happened." Taking a deep breath, Olivia sagged a little, her shoulders drooping. She knew Rachel was right, but it didn't ease the heaviness she felt inside. Meanwhile, Michael Hayes sat in a small, chilly room at the police station. Pale gray walls, a metal table, and bright fluorescent lights made the space feel all the more claustrophobic. He wore a wrinkled white dress shirt, hands clenched together on the table. A middle-aged woman entered, the renowned detective Sarah Collins, known for her strict, incisive investigative style. She placed a file on the table in front of Michael and sat down opposite him. "Mr. Hayes, let's cut to the chase. Do you understand that your actions last night violated the code of conduct for a police officer?" Michael nodded, his eyes bloodshot from guilt and lack of sleep. I don't know what happened. I just felt like I had to control that situation. I couldn't bear failing again. Sarah regarded him intently, her gaze sharp but not completely devoid of empathy. Michael, what you're saying isn't an excuse, but I don't believe you're a bad person. You have to face the consequences of your actions and change if you want a second chance. Michael lowered his head, shoulders trembling slightly. I know. I'll cooperate. Morning light crept through the blinds, illuminating the small room where Michael Hayes sat. He was perched on a worn wooden chair, dark circles under his eyes from countless sleepless nights. The clock on the desk ticked away, as though counting down the final moments of a chapter in his life. A letter from the city police department lay on the table, confirming his indefinite suspension and mandatory participation in a counseling program. Part of him felt somewhat relieved that he no longer had to endure the nightly tension of patrol duty, but another part of him was filled with regret. This had once been the job he poured all his passion and hope into. He opened the small drawer beside him and pulled out an old photograph, a family picture from his son's birthday last year. The boy's face beamed with pure joy, while his wife wore a gentle smile. But now, that family was shattered. Michael clutched the photo, tears rolling down his cheeks. He knew he had to do something to atone for his mistakes, even if only a little. Michael walked into a small room where the first group counseling session for officers dealing with serious mental health issues was being held. The room was well lit, with plastic chairs arranged in a circle. The faces around him bore the marks of time and weariness. A middle-aged man with salt and pepper hair, round glasses, and a warm, low voice stood in the center of the circle. Hello, everyone. I'm Dr. Samuel Turner, the lead counselor for this program. Here, we're not here to judge each other. We're here to listen and help one another work through our past mistakes. Michael took a seat at the far end of the circle, his hands clasped tightly. When it was his turn to introduce himself, he raised his head, speaking softly. My name is Michael Hayes. I used to be a police officer. I made a serious mistake, and I'm here to try to fix it. Silence enveloped the room. A few people nodded, as if they recognized the pain in his words. Officer Hayes, Dr. Turner said gently, you were brave enough to walk through that door. That's the first step, and the hardest one. Meanwhile, Olivia Parker continued her work. Each day, she still drove her old truck to industrial areas, inspecting outdated fire suppression systems and ensuring they were functioning properly. But ever since the incident with Michael, she'd come to realize that her job wasn't just about technical work or safety. She began attending a community seminar for people who had experienced tense incidents with law enforcement. There she shared her story, one of courage, composure, and how to handle a dangerous situation without letting it escalate. Sometimes, staying calm and patient can save an entire situation, Olivia told the group during a session. And sometimes, it can even save a person's life. Applause filled the room. Olivia smiled, feeling that she was doing something more meaningful than just checking fire extinguishers and safety systems. A few months later, Olivia received a handwritten letter, quite rare in this day and age. The return address was clearly printed, from Michael Hayes. Opening it, she found shaky but sincere handwriting. Olivia, I don't know where to begin, but I want to apologize. I'm sorry for what I did that night. There's no excuse for my actions, but I'm trying to change. I've joined a counseling program and am slowly confronting the demons in my mind. I know I can never erase what I've done, but I hope one day I'll find some peace. Thank you, Olivia. You not only kept that situation from becoming a tragedy, but you also helped me see I need to change. Wishing you health and success. Michael Hayes. Olivia set the letter down, her eyes filling with tears. Some wounds may never fully heal, but genuine apologies can act like a balm that eases the pain. On a spring morning, Olivia drove through deserted streets once again. The sun rose in the distance, bathing tall buildings in its golden light. She turned on the radio, letting gentle music fill her cramped cabin. Somewhere in this city, Michael Hayes was painstakingly putting his life back together. Perhaps he would never return to being a police officer, but he was trying to find a new path, one with less darkness. Olivia knew not every story had a perfect ending, but at least this one had hope. And sometimes, hope is all we need to keep moving forward. Her truck rolled along the road stretched out before her, carrying with it the tale of one fateful night, a story of power, mistakes, forgiveness, and second chances. 2 weeks later, Olivia was in a large warehouse, inspecting old fire extinguishers in preparation for routine maintenance. Sunlight streamed through tall windows, creating glaring patches of brightness on the dusty concrete floor. Olivia? She turned to see Daniel Reyes standing at the entrance, his hands tucked into the pockets of his police jacket. He wore a friendly smile as he approached. "Officer Reyes, I'm surprised to see you here." Reyes nodded. "I wanted to talk to you about Michael Hayes." Olivia set down the fire extinguisher she was holding and crossed her arms. "How is he doing?" Michael agreed to join a psychological rehabilitation program for police officers. He also wrote a full, honest report about what happened that night. Olivia breathed a sigh of relief. "It seems like he wants to make amends." "I think so," Reyes said, his voice lowering. "But it won't be easy to fix a mistake like that. It's going to be a long journey, and Michael has a lot of work to do." Olivia nodded, a spark of hope in her eyes. "I hope he finds the right path." Reyes smiled, then regarded Olivia earnestly. "And you should be proud of yourself too, Olivia. Not everyone can handle a situation like that and manage it calmly the way you did." Olivia gave a slight, thoughtful smile in return. "Thank you, Reyes. But I think sometimes doing the right thing is the hardest thing of all." A few weeks later, Olivia was sitting on the small sofa in her apartment. A warm, yellow lamp cast its glow across the peaceful living space. On the coffee table lay a letter from the city police department informing her. The letter stated that Michael Hayes would be transferred to a long-term counseling program and that the case had been closed under strict supervision. Olivia folded the letter, set it down on the table, and gazed out the window. In the distance, city lights flickered like stars in the sky. A feeling of calm welled up inside her. She understood that not every story has a perfectly happy ending, but sometimes small sparks of light in the darkness are enough to guide lost souls back home. A sharp burn assaulted Olivia's eyes, nose, and throat like a razor slicing through each breath. Every time she inhaled, a searing sensation expanded, nearly suffocating her. Yet amid the chaos, her mind stayed focused on a single thought. "I have to get out of here. I can't collapse now." Drawing on every ounce of strength she had left, Olivia crouched low and hurried along rows of scattered cars. She felt her breaths rasping in her throat, each inhale a painful effort. But step by step, she remained composed. Behind her, Michael Hayes still stood there panting, a can of pepper spray dangling from his hand. His gaze swept over Olivia's shadowy figure weaving among the cars. Rage and wounded pride still burned within him. Yet there was also fear. He had gone too far. From a distance, the security guard continued filming. He caught every one of Michael's actions on camera and the anguish on Olivia's face. His voice shook as he spoke into his radio. "The situation is escalating. We need the police right away. I repeat, we need immediate backup." On the other end, the dispatcher's voice came through clearly, confirmed. "A patrol unit is en route. Keep a safe distance and continue to provide updates." The guard lowered his radio, hands trembling. He knew he couldn't directly interfere, not when the man was armed with a baton and clearly out of control. Olivia blinked repeatedly, her eyes bloodshot and streaming. She grabbed a dirty rag from the ground, wiping her tearful, stinging eyes. The pain burned on, but at least now she could see a bit more clearly. She heard Michael's footsteps drawing closer, each ragged breath almost a growl. Olivia knew she couldn't keep running. She had to face the situation head-on, but with strategy, not violence. Michael appeared from around the car's corner, his eyes red and a baton gleaming under the yellowish lights. "You think you can get away?" he roared, voice cracking with anger. Olivia straightened, raising her hands once more. Her breathing was still labored, but her voice was firm and clear. "Michael, stop. You can't change what happened, but you can stop now. The patrol unit is on its way. You don't want this to get worse, do you?" Michael hesitated, his eyes flickering. Olivia's words cut through the chaotic rage in his mind. Then he noticed the security guard in the distance, still recording. He felt cornered, with no way out. "You don't understand," Michael screamed. I've lost everything. I can't let you win. But Olivia looked at him, her eyes sincere and patient. You don't have to prove anything to me, Michael. You only need to prove to yourself that you're still human, that you can stop before it's too late. Michael stood there, his shoulders shaking. The baton fell slightly, only to be clenched again. He didn't know what to do. He felt himself sinking into a dark, bottomless pit. Just then, a police siren blared in the distance, blue and red lights flashing against the concrete walls. Patrol cars sped into the parking lot, screeching to a stop near where Michael and Olivia stood. "Police! Drop your weapon immediately," an officer shouted over the loudspeaker. Michael flinched, his eyes wide. He looked at Olivia, then at the approaching officers with their weapons ready. "Michael, put the baton down," Olivia said, her voice gentle but urgent. "This is your last chance. End this the right way." Michael glanced down at the baton in his hand. Everything seemed to slow. The sirens, footsteps, and Olivia's voice merged into a single echo in his mind. At last, with a trembling breath, he let his arm fall, the baton clattering onto the ground with a hollow clang. Raising his hands, head bowed, he surrendered. Officers quickly closed in, cuffing Michael and leading him away. He didn't resist or say a word. He walked with the weight of the world on his shoulders. Olivia sat on a step in the parking lot while the security guard handed her a bottle of water. She opened it, sipping slowly. Her eyes were red and swollen from the pepper spray, but inside she felt deep relief. "You did great," the security guard said quietly. "Without you, this could have turned into a tragedy." Olivia offered a faint smile. "I only did what had to be done, but I hope Michael realizes his mistake and changes." The patrol car carrying Michael disappeared from view. Silence settled over the parking lot once more, the yellow lamps casting light on the cold concrete. Olivia stood, scanning the empty space. She knew this night would remain one she'd never forget. A night when the line between survival and destruction was a hair's breadth. She headed to her truck, climbed in, and started the engine. As she drove out, she left the yellow lamps and a story of courage, composure, and the glimmer of hope amid thick darkness. A gray sky foretold a gloomy day. Light rain pattered against the large windows of the city police department, where Michael Hayes sat in a small, chilly interrogation room. His hands were cuffed in front of him, his head bowed, eyes staring emptily at a tiny scratch on the metal table. Across from him, Detective Sarah Collins carefully opened a thick file and laid it out in front of Michael. Photos from the scene, Olivia's report, and footage from the security guard were all inside. Sarah eyed Michael, her gaze piercing but containing a rare note of empathy. "Michael, do you realize how far you went?" Sarah asked in a low, steady voice. Michael didn't raise his head, but his voice came out, barely audible. I've destroyed everything." Sarah nodded, her tone lacking harshness. "You put an innocent woman's life at risk. You disgrace this uniform and the trust it stands for. But Michael, you still have a choice. You can be honest, you can face your mistakes and start making them right." Michael took a deep breath, as though gathering the last of his courage. When he lifted his head, his eyes were bloodshot and weary. "I'll cooperate. I'll give a full statement. I can't live with this burden any longer." Sarah let out a sigh of relief. She jotted down a quick note in her notepad, then stood up. "That's the first step, Michael, and it's the most important one." Meanwhile, Olivia Parker had returned to her daily work routine. She was at a large warehouse area, inspecting the fire extinguishers mounted on the walls. But today, her pace was slower, and her eyes seemed to constantly drift off into an unfocused distance. A young colleague, Jason Miller, approached her carrying a clipboard. "Olivia, are you all right? You seem a bit tired." Olivia offered a faint smile, but it couldn't disguise the fatigue in her eyes. "Thanks, Jason. I'm fine. It's just, some things aren't easy to get out of your head." Jason nodded. "I heard about the incident with that police officer. I think you did really well. Not everyone could handle a situation like that with such courage and composure." Olivia nodded in appreciation, but said nothing more. She still felt a pang of guilt deep inside, wondering if there was something else she could have done to help Michael before everything escalated so badly. A few weeks later, at the city courthouse, the hearing regarding Michael Hayes' misconduct took place. The courtroom was packed with police officers, news reporters, and various citizens interested in the case. Olivia Parker was called to testify. She sat in the witness chair, her hands resting neatly on her lap, and her voice was steady yet filled with emotion as she recounted what had happened. "I don't believe Michael Hayes is a bad person. I believe he was deeply hurt, and fear led him down the wrong path. But that doesn't excuse what he did." Michael, seated not far away, listened to every word, his head bowed. Each sentence felt like a knife cutting into him, but they were words he needed to hear. "I hope he realizes his mistakes and takes this opportunity to change, not just for himself, but for the people he once swore to protect." When the hearing ended, Michael was permanently dismissed from duty and required to take part in a long-term psychological rehabilitation program. He would also be closely monitored during this period to ensure he posed no danger to himself or others. The following month, Olivia received a letter. She immediately recognized the scrawled handwriting on the envelope. Michael Hayes. "Olivia, I have begun the rehabilitation program and am confronting myself, step by step. The sleepless nights and nightmares are still here, but I'm trying. I can't go back and change what I did, but I can make sure it never happens again. Thank you, Olivia. Thank you for staying calm when I lost control. Thank you for giving me a second chance, fragile though it may be. I hope that one day I can atone for my mistakes. Wishing you good health and peace. Michael Hayes." Olivia folded the letter and placed it in the drawer of her desk. She sat there, gazing out the window where the sun was slowly setting behind the towering buildings. Michael Hayes spent the following days volunteering at organizations that assist police officers suffering from trauma. He began sharing his story, openly admitting his mistakes, hoping it might help others avoid the wrong path he had taken. As for Olivia Parker, she continued her work, a devoted fire safety specialist, resilient and strong. She understood that sometimes justice doesn't come immediately, but hope can still emerge from the darkest places. In a world full of mistakes and losses, sometimes the best we can do is pause, take a deep breath, and choose the right path, no matter how difficult it might be. A bright orange sunset lit up the sky. Olivia pulled over to the side of the road, watching the last rays of the day filtering through the trees. A new beginning was unfolding. For Michael, for Olivia, and for everyone brave enough to face the darkness within themselves. The sun gradually sank below the horizon, its final rays fading and giving way to a deep blue sky studded with a few twinkling stars. On the rooftop of a downtown building, Olivia Parker leaned against the railing, a warm cup of coffee in her hand. Behind her was a reception. A small gathering where she had just finished sharing her experiences with a group of young industrial safety professionals. Her life carried on, but it was undeniable that that fateful night had left a profound mark on her soul. Olivia was no longer just an ordinary safety engineer. She had become a symbol of composure, perseverance, and courage in critical moments. "Miss Parker?" A voice called from behind her. Olivia turned around to see Jason Miller, her young colleague, holding 2 cans of soda and grinning from ear to ear. "I figured you'd prefer this over coffee," Jason said, handing her a can. "I figured you'd prefer this over coffee," Jason said, handing her a can. Olivia accepted it, smiling gently. "Thanks, Jason. We did well today." Jason nodded, leaning against the railing beside Olivia. "Miss Olivia, do you think Officer Michael Hayes, do you think he can really change? Like, truly change?" Olivia was silent for a moment, her eyes fixed on the twinkling lights in the distance. "I think anyone can change, Jason. But it takes time, sincerity, and sometimes even pain. Michael hit rock bottom that night, and only he can decide whether he wants to climb out of that pit." Jason nodded, a contemplative look in his eyes. Meanwhile, at a rehabilitation center for police officers, Michael Hayes was sitting in a small room facing his counselor, Dr. Samuel Turner. The room was simply furnished, with motivational posters on the walls and a few small potted plants in the corners. Michael looked more worn down than ever, but there was a faint spark in his eyes, as though he were trying to grip a thin thread to pull himself back from the abyss. "Michael, you've been here for 2 months now. Today, I'd like you to talk about that night, the night everything changed." Michael bowed his head, his hands clasped tightly together. "That night, I felt like I was drowning, not literally, but on the inside. Every word Olivia said cut into my pride like a knife. I couldn't bear the thought of failing one more time. But when I looked into her eyes, I saw courage. I saw a calmness I'd never possessed myself. Dr. Turner nodded, encouraging him to continue. "Do you regret it, Michael?" Michael nodded emphatically, tears threatening to spill from the corners of his eyes. "I regret it every single day. I hurt someone who didn't deserve it. I betrayed my oath and betrayed myself. But I can't turn back time. All I can do is move forward." Dr. Turner offered a gentle smile. "That's the most important thing, Michael. We can't change the past, but we can learn from it and build a better future." Michael nodded, wiping away his tears. He knew there was a long road ahead of him, but at least he had begun the journey. A few months later, at a seminar titled Recovery and Rebuilding Trust in Law Enforcement, Olivia entered a large auditorium. She had been invited as a guest speaker, sharing her story with police officers, community leaders, and those who had survived similar situations. When she finished her speech, the room erupted in applause. Olivia smiled, bowed in thanks, and started to make her way down from the stage. In the crowd, she spotted a familiar figure, Michael Hayes, wearing civilian clothes now, no longer a police uniform. He stood there with his hands in his pockets, his expression filled with hesitation and anxiety. Olivia walked over and stood before him. They gazed at each other in silence for a long moment. "Hello, Olivia," Michael said quietly but firmly. "Hello, Michael," Olivia replied, her eyes warm. I just wanted to say thank you. Thank you for staying calm that night. Thank you for not giving up on me, even though I deserved it." Olivia smiled, her eyes brimming with tears. "Everyone deserves a second chance, Michael. I'm really glad to see you taking yours." Michael nodded, his shoulders slumping as though a weight had just been lifted off him. "I still have a long road ahead, but at least I'm headed in the right direction." Olivia placed a supportive, trusting hand on his shoulder. "You can do this, Michael. I believe that." As the sun gradually set and the lights in the hall began to glow, Olivia and Michael stood there, two people from two different worlds who once confronted each other under extreme circumstances. But now, they were no longer enemies or adversaries. They were two individuals bearing scars of the past, yet both holding on to the hope of a better future. In a world filled with mistakes and heartbreak, sometimes all it takes is one moment of clarity, one timely word, or a small act of courage to change everything. And that night, beneath the city's dim lights, those two people found forgiveness, compassion, and above all, hope. The empty parking lot had now become a tense battleground between reason and chaos. The heavy breathing of Olivia and Michael echoed among the rows of silent cars, reminding them of how perilous their situation was. Olivia gripped the fire extinguisher tightly, sweat mingling with the sting of pepper spray as it trickled down her face. In her deep brown eyes was a blend of alertness and determination. She knew Michael had crossed the boundary of rational thought and was now a ticking time bomb that could explode at any moment. Michael stood facing her, his trembling hands wrapped around a stun gun. His eyes were bloodshot, his face contorted with uncontrollable rage. Sweat dripped from his forehead onto his shirt. He smirked, but it wasn't a grin of amusement. It was the grin of a man teetering on the edge of despair. "You think you're so clever, don't you?" Michael said, his voice cracking. "You think you can stand up to me? I'm the police. I'm the one in charge here." Olivia didn't respond. She just looked at him, her gaze devoid of fear but full of compassion, and that only fueled Michael's anger further. He lunged at Olivia, stun gun raised, ready to fire. Olivia reacted in a flash. She sidestepped and raised the fire extinguisher like a shield. A bolt of current shot through the air, striking the metal cylinder and sparking slightly on impact. "Stop, Michael! You can't win this!" Olivia shouted, her voice filled with urgent pleading. But Michael didn't listen. He charged again, wild like a wounded animal. Olivia yanked the pin on the fire extinguisher and sprayed it straight at Michael's face. A thick cloud of white powder engulfed him, blocking his view. Michael staggered back, coughing uncontrollably, his hands swiping at the dense chemical powder on his face. He stumbled, disoriented. Olivia didn't hesitate. She stepped forward quickly and kicked the stun gun out of Michael's reach. It skidded across the concrete and stopped under a nearby car. "Michael, stop!" Olivia shouted one last time, her voice echoing in the open space. Michael dropped to his knees, clutching his face. His breaths came in short, ragged gasps, nearly choking in his throat. Olivia stood a few steps away, her eyes fixed on him. Time seemed to stand still in the parking lot. The powder from the fire extinguisher still floated in the air, forming a hazy white fog. Olivia kept a safe distance, carefully watching Michael. He lowered his hands, his eyes red and tearing. His shoulders trembled, as though all his strength and resolve had left him. He sank onto the cold concrete, his hands cradling his head. What have I done?" Michael whispered, his voice trembling. Olivia relaxed her shoulders and caught her breath. She knew this could be the turning point. Michael had hit rock bottom, and now he only had one path left: surrender. "Michael," Olivia said softly, "you've gone too far, but it's not over yet. You can still stop. You can still make things right." Michael looked up at Olivia, his eyes filled with regret and pain. I'm sorry," Michael murmured, tears spilling from the corners of his eyes. Sirens blared in the distance. Red and blue lights flickered, reflecting off the rows of cars in the dark lot. Olivia heard the screech of tires on concrete and knew the patrol unit had arrived. A team of armed officers entered the parking lot, flashlights sweeping in every direction. Officer Daniel Reyes led the group, his gun raised. "Drop your weapon and put your hands up," Reyes shouted. Olivia stepped forward, raising her hands high. "It's all right. He's not a threat anymore." Reyes looked around and saw Michael sitting on the ground, hands raised in surrender. He lowered his gun and approached Michael. "Michael, you've gone too far," Reyes said, his voice heavy with sadness. Michael didn't respond. He just sat there, bowing his head, allowing the tears to fall onto the cold concrete. Officer Reyes handcuffed Michael and led him out of the parking lot. Michael didn't resist or say anything. He simply walked away quietly, his back hunched as though he was carrying the weight of the world on his shoulders. Olivia stood alone in the empty parking lot, white powder scattered everywhere. And the silence returned after the storm. She closed her eyes and took a deep breath, letting the chill of the night soothe the burning wounds from the pepper spray. The security guard from a distance approached, still holding his phone. "Miss Parker, are you okay?" Olivia opened her eyes and nodded slightly. "Yes, I'm fine. It's finally over." As the sun began to rise in the distance, the gentle morning light spread across the quiet parking lot. Olivia sat in her truck, her eyes fixed on the horizon that was gradually brightening. The peaceful evening she had hoped for had turned into a nightmare, but now it was all over. There were wounds that would take a long time to heal, but Olivia knew she had done everything she could. The truck slowly rolled away, leaving behind the darkness, the scattered white powder, and the story of anger, determination, and redemption. The first rays of the new day illuminated the road ahead. The road that Olivia knew she would continue to move forward on, stronger and more resilient than ever. A week after the fateful night at the parking lot, Olivia Parker sat in a small cafe in the city center. Early sunlight streamed through the large glass windows, creating shimmering light streaks on the shiny wooden table. She gently stirred her herbal tea, her eyes gazing distantly through the window frame. The remnants of that night were still etched on her body. Her eyes still slightly red, her throat still felt dry from the pepper spray. But the most significant thing was the memories. They clung to her like persistent ghosts, seeping into every restless sleep. A familiar voice pulled her out of her thoughts. "Hello, Olivia." Officer Daniel Reyes stood before her desk, holding a cup of coffee, his eyes filled with sincerity and fatigue. Olivia offered a faint smile, gesturing for him to sit down. "Thank you for coming, Reyes." Reyes sat down across from Olivia, removing his police hat and placing it aside. "I think we need to talk about that night." Olivia nodded, her eyes still gentle but weighed down. "How is Michael?" Reyes sighed, his hand tightly gripping the paper cup holding the coffee. "Michael is being held in the officer's holding cell. He has agreed to participate in a special psychological rehabilitation program. But Olivia, I'm not sure he can overcome it. He carries too much pain and anger inside him." Olivia remained silent for a moment, her eyes filled with sadness. "He's been lost for a very long time, Reyes. But I believe that, even if it's just a faint glimmer of hope, it's still worth holding on to." Reyes nodded, a slight smile appearing on his lips. You're right, at least he didn't cause any more harm to others that night. And that's thanks to you, Olivia. Olivia bowed her head, her hands clasped together. I just did what I had to do. Reyes looked at Olivia for a long moment, then stood up, putting his police hat back on. You did more than that, Olivia. You saved not only yourself but also Michael. Never forget that. He placed a business card on the table. If you need anything, don't hesitate to call me. Olivia nodded, watching Reyes's figure leave the cafe. In her hand was the business card with neat lettering. Officer Daniel Reyes, City Police Department. In a small room with pale gray walls and the cold glow of fluorescent lights, Michael Hayes sat across from Dr. Samuel Turner, the psychological counselor of the rehabilitation program. Michael looked worn down and exhausted, but there was something different in his eyes. A faint glimmer of light, a sign of awakening. Michael, today we're going to talk about how you felt after that night, Dr. Turner said, his voice warm and calm. Michael took a deep breath, his shoulders trembling. I almost killed an innocent person, just because I couldn't control myself. Dr. Turner nodded, encouraging him to continue. I saw Olivia's eyes in that final moment. They were eyes of fear, but also of compassion. She had every reason to hate me, to fight me, but she didn't. She just wanted to save me from myself. Michael bowed his head, tears streaming down his haggard face. I don't know if I can fix what I've done, but I want to try. I can't live with this obsession forever. Dr. Turner placed his hand on the table, his eyes filled with encouragement. That's the beginning, Michael. A difficult start, but the right one. This journey won't be easy, but I'll be here, walking with you. Michael looked up, his eyes wet, but determined. Returning to her office, Olivia sat at her desk, her fingers lightly tracing the old fire extinguisher, the extinguisher that had saved her life that night. She lifted it, looking at its scratched and dented surface. It was no longer just a safety tool. It was a symbol of survival, of composure amidst an emotional storm. The remnants of that night still marked her body. Her eyes still slightly red, her throat still felt dry from the pepper spray. But the most significant were the memories. They clung to her like persistent ghosts, infiltrating every restless sleep. A familiar voice pulled her out of her thoughts. Hello, Olivia. Officer Daniel Reyes stood before her desk, holding a cup of coffee, his eyes filled with sincerity and fatigue. Olivia offered a gentle smile, gesturing for him to sit down. Thank you for coming, Reyes. Reyes sat down across from Olivia, removing his police hat and placing it aside. I think we need to talk about that night. Olivia nodded, her eyes still gentle but heavy. How is Michael? Reyes sighed, his hand tightly gripping the paper cup holding the coffee. Michael is being held in the officer's holding cell. He has agreed to participate in a special psychological rehabilitation program. But, Olivia, I'm not sure he can overcome it. He carries too much pain and anger inside him. Olivia remained silent for a moment, her eyes filled with sadness. He's been lost for a very long time, Reyes, but I believe that, even if it's just a faint glimmer of hope, it's still worth holding on to. Reyes nodded, a slight smile appearing on his lips. You're right. At least he didn't cause any more harm to others that night. And that's thanks to you, Olivia. Olivia bowed her head, her hands clasped together. I just did what I had to do. Reyes looked at Olivia for a long moment, then stood up, putting his police hat back on. You did more than that, Olivia. You saved not only yourself, but also Michael. Never forget that. He placed a business card on the table. If you need anything, don't hesitate to call me. Olivia nodded, watching Reyes's figure leave the cafe. In her hand was the business card with neat lettering. Officer Daniel Reyes, City Police Department. In a small room with pale gray walls and the cold glow of fluorescent lights, Michael Hayes sat across from Dr. Samuel Turner, the psychological counselor of the rehabilitation program. Michael looked haggard and tired, but there was something different in his eyes, a small glimmer of light, a sign of awakening. Michael, today we're going to talk about how you felt after that night, Dr. Turner said, his voice warm and calm. Michael took a deep breath, his shoulders trembling. I almost killed an innocent person, just because I couldn't control myself. Dr. Turner nodded, encouraging him to continue. I saw Olivia's eyes in that final moment. They were eyes of fear, but also of compassion. She had every reason to hate me, to fight me, but she didn't. She just wanted to save me from myself. Michael bowed his head, tears streaming down his haggard face. I don't know if I can fix what I've done, but I want to try. I can't live with this obsession forever. Dr. Turner placed his hand on the table, his eyes filled with encouragement. That's the beginning, Michael. A difficult start, but the right one. This journey won't be easy, but I'll be here, walking with you. Michael looked up, his eyes wet but determined. Returning to her office, Olivia sat at her desk, her fingers lightly tracing the old fire extinguisher, the extinguisher that had saved her life that night. She lifted it, looking at its scratched and dented surface. It was no longer just a safety tool. It was a symbol of survival, of composure amidst an emotional storm. On her desk was a folder labeled, Parking Lot Incident, Michael Hayes. Olivia stared at the box, her fingers lightly brushing over its smooth surface. She had often wondered if it was worth opening it, whether she was ready to face every detail in the report. A light knock on the door echoed, pulling her out of her thoughts. Miss Olivia? Jason Miller, her young colleague, poked his head through the small doorway. In his hand was a stack of documents and a somewhat forced smile. Olivia, you have a meeting with management at 3 p.m. I thought you should know in advance to prepare. Olivia gave a gentle nod, setting the fire extinguisher down. Thank you, Jason. I appreciate the heads up. Jason nodded, leaning against the railing beside Olivia. Do you need any help preparing for the meeting? Olivia shook her head slightly. I think I'm okay, but thanks for offering. Jason smiled reassuringly. Anytime. Just let me know if you need anything. He gave her a supportive pat on the shoulder before exiting the office, leaving Olivia alone with her thoughts once more. She took a deep breath, knowing that the upcoming meeting would require her to present the incident report and perhaps discuss further safety measures to prevent such occurrences in the future. As she looked out the window, she reflected on how much had changed since that night. Not only had her perspective on safety deepened, but her understanding of human frailty and the capacity for redemption had grown as well. With a final glance at the fire extinguisher, Olivia stood up, ready to face the challenges ahead with renewed strength and resilience. Olivia nodded, offering a gentle smile. Thank you, Jason. I'll prepare right away. Jason stood there for a moment, hesitating before continuing. You know, I heard about what you did that night. You're extremely brave. If it were me, I don't think I could have kept my cool like that. Olivia looked at Jason, her eyes gentle. Thank you, Jason. But sometimes, staying calm isn't a choice. It's the only thing you can do if you want to survive. Jason nodded, stepping out of the room and gently closing the door behind him. Olivia turned back to look at the folder again. Taking a deep breath, she opened it. Inside were pristine white sheets of paper, each page neatly stapled. Detailed reports from witnesses, from the security guard, and from other police officers. Every word was a slice of memory, each line a piece of the full picture of that fateful night. One passage in the report made Olivia stop. Officer Hayes showed clear signs of losing emotional control. His actions no longer followed any protocol and put Olivia Parker's life at risk. However, thanks to Olivia Parker's calmness and excellent situation handling skills, the situation did not escalate into a tragedy. She set the paper down, feeling a lump form in her throat. No one enters a night shift expecting to face life and death. But she was there. She survived. At the Psychological Rehabilitation Center for Police Officers, Michael Hayes stood by the small window of the counseling room. Outside was a small garden with a few blooming bushes. In his hand was an old notebook with scribbled words on the page. Every day is a battle. A part of me wants to give up, to retreat to the darkness where I can hide my shame. But another part, a small but strong part, wants to find the person I used to be. The door opened, and Dr. Samuel Turner walked in with a slight smile. Michael, are you ready? Michael nodded, folding the notebook and placing it into his coat pocket. Today was the day he would speak to a group of young officers, those also facing psychological wounds they dare not admit. Back in her office, Olivia sat at her desk, her fingers lightly tracing the old fire extinguisher, the extinguisher that had saved her life that night. She held it up, looking at its scratched and dented surface. It was no longer just a safety tool. It was a symbol of survival, of composure amidst an emotional storm. Next to her desk, On her computer screen, an email from Rachel Carter, director of Metro Fire Safety Consultants, appeared. In the email, Rachel wrote, "Olivia, you did exceptionally well. But I know you've been through so much. Take some time for yourself. I want you to take a week off. Go somewhere away from this city and forget everything for a while. You deserve it." Olivia gave a gentle smile, clicking the accept button. A week later, Olivia stood on a quiet beach, the gentle waves lapping at her bare feet. The cool sea breeze blew through her hair, carrying the salty scent of the ocean. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath and feeling peace spreading throughout her body. Somewhere in the city, Michael Hayes was still on the long road to atone for his mistakes. He might never completely erase the wounds in his heart, but he was walking the right path. As for Olivia, she knew her life would never be the same again, but she also knew she was stronger, braver, and most importantly, she was still standing, steadfast like a lighthouse amidst a storm. No matter how dark the night, the sun will always rise in the morning. The pale golden sunlight of the afternoon streamed through the large windows of the Metro Fire Safety Consultants office, casting a warm glow over Olivia Parker's desk. The sounds of sirens from outside echoed, blending with the tapping of keyboards from her colleagues in the office. Everything seemed to return to normal, but Olivia knew that inside she still carried unhealed wounds. On her desk was a folder labeled, "Parking Lot Incident, Michael Hayes." Olivia stared intently at the box, her fingers lightly brushing over its smooth surface. She had often wondered if it was worth opening it, whether she was ready to face every detail in the report. A light knock on the door echoed, pulling her out of her thoughts. "Miss Olivia?" Jason Miller, her young colleague, poked his head through the small doorway. In his hand was a stack of documents and a somewhat forced smile. "Olivia, you have a meeting with management at 3 p.m. I thought you should know in advance to prepare." Olivia gave a gentle nod, setting the fire extinguisher down. "Thank you, Jason. I appreciate the heads up." Jason nodded, leaning against the railing beside Olivia. "Do you need any help preparing for the meeting?" Olivia shook her head slightly. "I think I'm okay, but thanks for offering." Jason smiled reassuringly. "Anytime. Just let me know if you need anything." He gave her a supportive pat on the shoulder before exiting the office, leaving Olivia alone with her thoughts once more. She took a deep breath, knowing that the upcoming meeting would require her to present the incident report and perhaps discuss further safety measures to prevent such occurrences in the future. As she looked out the window, she reflected on how much had changed since that night. Not only had her perspective on safety deepened, but her understanding of human frailty and the capacity for redemption had grown as well. With a final glance at the fire extinguisher, Olivia stood up, ready to face the challenges ahead with renewed strength and resilience. He placed a business card on the table. "I'm ready, Dr. Turner." Dr. Turner gently patted Michael on the shoulder, and the two of them walked out of the room, heading toward the seminar hall. A month later, Olivia received an email from the Rehabilitation Center. "Dear Miss Olivia Parker, we would like to invite you to participate in a sharing session with police officers currently enrolled in our rehabilitation program. Your presence could make a significant difference." Olivia read the email several times. Part of her wanted to decline. She wasn't sure she was ready to face Michael again. But another part reminded her that sometimes the hardest thing is also the right thing to do. Finally, she clicked the accept button. The seminar room was small but cozy. Chairs were arranged in a circle, and in the center was a small podium for the speaker. Olivia entered, her eyes scanning the unfamiliar faces, men and women, each carrying their own untold story. Across the room, Olivia spotted Michael Hayes. He was standing beside Dr. Turner, wearing a simple shirt and jeans. His face looked calm, but his eyes were filled with remorse. When their eyes met, both stood silently for a few seconds. Then Michael gave a slight nod, and Olivia responded with a small smile. During the sharing session, Olivia recounted her story, not just about that night, but also about what happened afterward. About the nightmares, about the moments she questioned whether she had done the right thing. But most importantly, she spoke about hope. We can all lose our way, but what matters is whether we have the courage to find our way back. I believe everyone deserves a second chance, as long as they truly want to change. Michael sat in the front row, his eyes welling up with tears. Olivia's words touched the depths of his heart. When the seminar concluded, Michael approached Olivia. The two stood facing each other. The space between them was no longer a battlefield. "Thank you, Olivia, for giving me this opportunity." Olivia nodded, her eyes shining with sincerity. "Take advantage of it, Michael. Don't let it go to waste." Michael gave a slight smile, and the two parted ways in the twilight filtering through the seminar room window. On the long and winding road of atonement, not everyone has the courage to keep going. But Michael Hayes did it. And Olivia Parker, that resilient woman, became a guiding light in the dark night. On the small screen of the video projector, images appeared sharp, sound clear. The footage from Olivia Parker's dashcam replayed everything that happened in that dim parking lot. Every word, every action, and most importantly, the moments when Michael Hayes lost control, swung the baton, sprayed pepper spray, and raised the stun gun, all captured in detail. Female officer, Lieutenant Karen Morris, silently watched the video, her eyebrows furrowed. Male officer, Officer David Collins, stood beside her, his sharp eyes glued to the screen. "Everything is too clear," Lieutenant Morris said, her voice cold but authoritative. "Michael Hayes, you have seriously violated conduct rules and used excessive force without just cause." Michael stood silently, his face pale under the flickering patrol car lights. His body seemed drained of energy, shoulders slumped. He tried to open his mouth to justify, but couldn't say anything. "We have to detain you and escalate this to the Internal Affairs Committee for further investigation," Lieutenant Morris continued. "Officer Collins, handcuff him again." Collins approached, pulling out the handcuffs and slowly moving toward Michael. "Michael, put your hands behind your back." Michael slowly raised his hands, his eyes vacant, as though he was seeing the end of everything he once cherished. I'm sorry," Michael murmured. But his words sank into the tense atmosphere. As Michael was escorted into the patrol car, Olivia stood silently beside her truck. The security guard, who had recorded the entire incident, approached her. "Are you okay, Miss Parker?" he asked, his voice still trembling from the tense situation. Olivia nodded, her eyes reflecting fatigue. Olivia nodded, offering a gentle smile. "Take advantage of it, Michael. Don't let it go to waste." Michael gave a slight smile, and the two parted ways in the twilight filtering through the seminar room window. On the long and winding road of atonement, not everyone has the courage to keep going. But Michael Hayes did it, and Olivia Parker, that resilient woman, became a guiding light in the dark night. On the small screen of the video projector, images appeared sharp, sound clear. The footage from Olivia Parker's dashcam replayed everything that happened in that dim parking lot. Every word, every action, and most importantly, the moments when Michael Hayes lost control, swung the baton, spray per spray, and raised the stun gun, all captured in detail. Female officer, Lieutenant Karen Morris, silently watched the video, her eyebrows furrowed. Male officer, Officer David Collins, stood beside her, his sharp eyes glued to the screen. "Everything is too clear," Lieutenant Morris said, her voice cold but authoritative. "Michael Hayes, you have seriously violated conduct rules and used excessive force without just cause." Michael stood silently, his face pale under the flickering patrol car lights. His body seemed drained of energy, shoulders slumped. He tried to open his mouth to justify, but couldn't say anything. "We have to detain you and escalate this to the Internal Affairs Committee for further investigation," Lieutenant Morris continued. "Officer Collins, handcuff him again." Collins approached, pulling out the handcuffs and slowly moving toward Michael. "Michael, put your hands behind your back." Michael slowly raised his hands, his eyes vacant, as though he was seeing the end of everything he once cherished. "I'm sorry," Michael murmured, but his words sank into the tense atmosphere. As Michael was escorted into the patrol car, Olivia stood silently beside her truck. The security guard, who had recorded the entire incident, approached her. "Are you okay, Miss Parker?" he asked, his voice still trembling from the tense situation. Olivia nodded, her eyes reflecting fatigue. "I'm fine. Thank you for standing on the side of truth. Without you, I don't know what would have happened." The security guard gave a small smile, but it carried a mixture of tension and relief. "Just doing what's right, Miss Parker. You're a brave woman." "I respect that." Lieutenant Morris stepped closer to Olivia, her gaze softening slightly as she looked at the woman who had bravely faced an out-of-control officer. "Miss Parker, we'll need your detailed statement at the station, but first you need to rest and take care of yourself." Olivia nodded, gently wiping her still stinging eyes. "I'll be there soon, Lieutenant Morris." 3 months later, Michael Hayes' hearing took place in a quiet but intensely charged courtroom. Senior officers, journalists, and several local residents were present to witness the outcome of a case that had shocked the community. Olivia sat in the witness stand, dressed in a professional suit, her eyes looking straight ahead, filled with confidence and determination. Michael, dressed in an orange prison jumpsuit, stood before the court with a somber expression. The evidence was undeniable. The security guard's video, footage from Olivia's dashcam, and detailed witness testimonies. In the end, the judge delivered the verdict. Michael Hayes was stripped of his badge, dismissed from the police force, and sentenced to 18 months in prison for unnecessary use of force and abuse of power. When the verdict was read, Michael hung his head, his shoulders trembling. He knew these were the consequences of the poor choices he had made. Olivia walked out of the courthouse and took a deep breath. There was no real sweetness in this victory, but at least justice had been served. A few weeks after the trial, Olivia received a handwritten letter. The handwriting was shaky, but she recognized it immediately. "Olivia, I don't expect you to forgive me, but I wanted to thank you for not abandoning me that night. You could have chosen to hurt me, but instead, you chose patience and calmness. I will pay for what I've done, but I hope that one day I can make amends. Thank you for standing your ground, Olivia. Michael Hayes." Olivia folded the letter and placed it in her desk drawer. She sat silently for a moment, her eyes gazing distantly out the window. On a bright spring morning, Olivia stood in the parking lot of another shopping center. A clipboard rested in her hands as she inspected the fire safety system, just like any other ordinary day. But today, the sunlight felt warmer and her heart felt lighter. No matter what challenges life threw at her, Olivia knew she would always have the strength to face them. Because sometimes, strength isn't about winning every battle, it's about standing firm in the middle of the storm. She looked up at the vast blue sky, smiled softly, and continued with her work. In a world filled with injustice and mistakes, sometimes all it takes is one person holding on to courage and patience to change an entire situation. Olivia Parker wasn't a hero, but she did the right thing at the moment it mattered most, and sometimes that's all it takes to make a difference. The sun climbed higher over the city skyline. In a quiet corner cafe, Olivia Parker sat by the window with a cup of chamomile tea in front of her. Sunlight filtered through the thick glass, casting soft golden rays across her face. She watched the people walking by outside, each carrying their own untold stories. She no longer felt haunted by that fateful night every time she closed her eyes, but the memories still occasionally crept into her dreams. The sting of pepper spray, Michael Hayes' furious shouting, and the weight of the fire extinguisher in her hands lingered somewhere deep in her mind. "Miss Parker." A voice pulled her from her thoughts. A middle-aged man in a black suit stood in front of her. He smiled politely and pulled out the chair across from her. "I'm David Grant, a representative from the City Police Department. Thank you for agreeing to meet with me." Olivia nodded, her eyes calm and steady. "I'm guessing you didn't come here just to have tea with me, did you, Mr. Grant?" Grant chuckled softly, then placed a folder on the table between them. "Miss Parker, we've concluded the investigation into the incident involving Michael Hayes. All the evidence supports your testimony and the security guard's video footage. Michael Hayes' career is over, and he will face legal consequences." But Grant paused, letting out a sigh. "I'm not just here to report the investigation's results. I want to tell you that sometimes this system isn't perfect. Michael wasn't a villain. He was a product of a harsh environment, of wounds left unhealed." Olivia nodded slowly, her voice calm and steady. "I never thought Michael was a bad man, but he made the wrong choice, and that choice nearly cost me my life. I can't forgive his actions, but I hope he finds his own peace someday." Grant was silent for a moment before slipping the folder back into his briefcase. "You're a strong woman, Miss Parker, Not many people could remain calm and brave in that situation. We, in the police force, owe you our gratitude. Olivia gave a faint smile, but there was a trace of sadness behind it. Thank you, Grant. But I don't need gratitude. I just want people like Michael and so many others to get the help they need before things spiral out of control. In a small prison cell, Michael Hayes sat on a cold metal cot. Around him were dull gray concrete walls illuminated by the weak glow of a flickering ceiling light. In his hands was a small notebook, and he was writing, "I used to be a good man. Or at least I thought I was. But somewhere along the way, I lost myself. I let anger, frustration, and pride guide me. And then I lost everything." I think about Olivia Parker every day. Not because she stood in front of me with a fire extinguisher in her hands, but because of her eyes. The way they looked at me. They weren't filled with hatred, but with disappointment. Maybe that's the most painful part. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want to make amends. If one day I'm ever free to walk out of here, I'll try to do something meaningful. Michael set the pen down, closed his eyes, and leaned his head against the cold wall. In the dim light of the prison cell, for the first time in months, he felt the faintest glimmer of light flicker within him. A few months later, Olivia stood before a crowded auditorium. She had accepted an invitation to speak at a conference on mental health and support for law enforcement officers. From the stage, she could see young faces, rookie officers just beginning their careers, and seasoned veterans with weary but hopeful eyes. Hello, everyone. My name is Olivia Parker. I'm not a police officer, and I'm certainly not a hero. I'm just a fire safety specialist who found herself in a situation I wouldn't wish upon anyone. She paused, scanning the audience with genuine eyes. But I'm not here today to talk about fear or danger. I'm here to talk about hope. Because even in the darkest moments, we can still find a way out. And sometimes, all it takes is someone willing to stop, to listen, and to extend a helping hand before it's too late. The auditorium fell silent. Then applause erupted, rolling through the crowd like a wave. One morning, Olivia received another letter with no return address. She opened it and began to read. Olivia, I've started volunteering inside the prison. I tell my story to others, people who are lost, just like I was. Maybe I can't change the past, but I hope I can stop someone else from repeating my mistakes. Thank you, Olivia, for not leaving me in the dark. Michael Hayes. Olivia folded the letter, her eyes glistening but steady. Every person carries scars, some visible, others buried deep within. But what truly matters is what we choose to do with those scars. Olivia Parker chose to stand tall, resilient, and unyielding. Michael Hayes chose to face his past and seek redemption. The darkness of that fateful night had passed, and a new day had begun. No matter how dark the sky becomes, light will always find its way through. Morning sunlight streamed through the windows of a police training center. In a small seminar room, young cadets sat upright, their faces filled with curiosity and anticipation as they looked toward the stage. A strong woman, with deep brown eyes and a steady, warm voice, stood before the microphone. Olivia Parker had returned to a place many thought she'd never set foot in again, a place tied to law enforcement. But this time, she wasn't there as a victim or a witness. She was there as a voice of resilience, hope, and change. And as her voice filled the room, it carried a message that would linger in every heart present. Even in the darkest moments, courage and compassion can light the way. I'm not standing here to tell you a hero's story, Olivia began, her voice echoing through the room. I'm standing here because I believe change cannot happen if we don't talk about what went wrong. And, more importantly, if we don't take action to make it right. The young officer sat in attentive silence. Olivia recounted that fateful night, leaving no detail untold. She spoke about the fear, the helplessness, and most importantly, the moment she realized that courage isn't the absence of fear. It's acting despite being utterly terrified. Each of you sitting here today carries an immense responsibility, but never forget that power comes with accountability, and every decision you make can change someone's life, including your own. The room erupted into applause. A few young officers bowed their heads, reflecting on Olivia's words. In the corner of the room, Officer Daniel Reyes leaned against the wall, smiling softly. He knew Olivia had turned her pain into something meaningful. At the correctional facility, Michael Hayes stood before a small group of inmates, men who had once been police officers, firefighters, or public servants, but had made mistakes and were now paying the price. He held a worn-out notebook in his hand, and his voice rang out clearly. "I used to stand where many of you once stood. I believed my badge could cover my mistakes. But that night, the night I nearly took an innocent woman's life, I realized no badge is big enough to hide the truth." The room was silent, every eye fixed on Michael. "I can't turn back time, but I can use the time I have left to do something right, and I believe each of you can do the same." After the session, a young inmate approached Michael. He looked to be around 25 years old, tattoos running down his arms and exhaustion etched into his face. "Mr. Hayes, do you think it's possible to forgive yourself?" Michael paused, his expression thoughtful before he nodded. "Forgiving yourself doesn't mean forgetting your mistakes. It means accepting that you were wrong, learning from it, and choosing not to make the same mistake again. You're still young. Don't let your worst moment define who you are." The young man nodded slowly, a faint glimmer of relief crossing his features before he turned and walked away, his shoulders just a little lighter. At the Metro Fire Safety Consultants headquarters, Olivia and Jason Miller sat in front of a computer screen. Displayed on the monitor was the plan for a new initiative, Emergency Response Training Program for security and police personnel. "Are you sure you want to do this?" Jason asked, concern evident in his eyes. "Yes, Jason," Olivia replied, her gaze steady and resolute. "We need to create change from the roots, not just in the system, but in the people within it. They need training, not just in technical protocols, but in emotional control and maintaining professional ethics." Jason nodded, a small smile forming on his face. "I think this is going to be an incredible project, Olivia. We can do this." On a crisp autumn afternoon, Olivia received a letter from Michael Hayes. Inside was a brief but heartfelt invitation. "I'm nearing the end of my rehabilitation program and will soon transition to a volunteer center. If you're willing, I'd like to meet with you one last time before starting this new chapter." Olivia set the letter down, her heart heavy. After a few days of contemplation, she decided to see him. At the City Rehabilitation Center, Olivia sat in a modest visitation room. The door creaked open, and Michael Hayes stepped inside. He looked different, thinner, but with an unmistakable sincerity in his eyes. "Thank you for coming, Olivia." Olivia nodded, maintaining her composure. "I wanted to thank you for not letting me fall too far. I lost everything, but I found a piece of myself in the ruins. I'm going to spend the rest of my life trying to help others avoid making the same mistakes I did." Olivia looked at Michael, and for the first time, she saw a different man, a man genuinely trying to redeem himself. "Goodbye, Michael." Olivia stepped out of the rehabilitation center, taking a deep breath. The crisp autumn air was cool and refreshing. She knew Michael's journey was just beginning, and in many ways, so was hers. Back in her truck, she looked into the rearview mirror. Her reflection stared back, eyes glimmering with a spark of hope. "Every day is a new opportunity, and I will never waste it." She started the engine and merged into the bustling traffic, the city lights flickering around her as life continued to move forward. The story of Olivia Parker and Michael Hayes was not a fairy tale with a perfect ending, but it was a story of forgiveness, courage, and relentless effort to make things right. In a world filled with shadows and injustices, sometimes all it takes is one person brave enough to stand up, to speak the truth, to do the right thing, to change the course of events. No matter how thick the darkness, the light of compassion and forgiveness can still shine through. As time passed, the incident between Olivia Parker and Michael Hayes became a focal point in local media outlets. News articles, interviews, and heated debates about professional ethics, abuse of power, and the courage to stand up for oneself flooded the headlines. Though Olivia never sought attention, she understood that her story had transcended her personal experience. Invitations started pouring in, from workshops, crisis management training programs, and even police academies. In the bright studio of a local television station, Olivia sat across from renowned anchor Evelyn Monroe. The cameras were adjusted, studio lights cast a warm glow, and an air of anticipation filled the space. "Miss Parker," Evelyn began, her voice steady yet compassionate, The incident between you and Officer Michael Hayes sparked significant public discourse. Many have called you a hero, a symbol of courage. How do you feel about these labels? Olivia took a deep breath, her gaze calm and steady. I don't see myself as a hero, Evelyn. I did what I believed was right in that moment. Anyone in my position would have done the same if they stayed calm and had the knowledge to protect themselves. Evelyn nodded, her expression reflecting admiration. You've become an inspiration to many, police officers, civilians, and survivors alike. What message would you like to share with those watching today? Olivia paused, her words carefully chosen. I want people to understand that courage isn't about being fearless, it's about acting despite your fear. And more importantly, systems only change when the people within them are willing to change themselves. It starts with accountability, empathy, and a commitment to doing better every single day. The studio was silent for a moment before Evelyn spoke softly. Wise words, Miss Parker. Thank you for being here today, and thank you for your bravery. The camera light faded, and the interview concluded. Olivia leaned back in her chair, exhaling slowly. She had walked through fire, through fear, through doubt, and emerged with a voice that carried weight. But she knew this wasn't the end. It was just the beginning of a larger conversation, one that she was determined to be a part of. Do you think this situation could have been prevented? Olivia nodded slowly, her expression thoughtful. I believe every escalated situation can be prevented with better training in crisis management and emotional control. We don't just need officers who are skilled in procedures. We need officers who excel in interacting with people, especially in high-pressure scenarios. Do you have any final message for those watching this program? Evelyn asked softly. Olivia paused for a moment, carefully choosing her words. Never stay silent when you know you're right. Don't let fear hold you back from standing up for the truth. But also remember, the truth must always be spoken with respect and calmness, because sometimes one moment of anger can change the lives of everyone involved. The studio fell silent, the weight of Olivia's words lingering in the air. The camera switched to a wide shot, and Evelyn concluded the interview with a warm smile. Thank you, Miss Parker, for sharing your story, your insights, and your courage with us today. You've given us all something to think about. The screen faded to black, and the segment ended. At the rehabilitation facility, Michael Hayes had completed a 6-month psychological recovery program. Long conversations with Dr. Samuel Turner had helped him confront the ghosts of his past, the unhealed wounds, the misplaced pride, and the anger that had clouded his judgment. One quiet afternoon, Michael was given permission to write one final letter before his transfer to a volunteer center for former inmates. Olivia, I don't know if you'll ever read this letter, but I need to write it. I've spent these past months reflecting on what I've done. You were right, I didn't just hurt you. I hurt myself and everyone around me. I can't turn back time, but I promise to dedicate the rest of my life to making amends for my actions. Thank you for not leaving me in the dark. Michael Hayes. Michael folded the letter carefully and handed it to the corrections officer. He then returned to his small window, staring out at the setting sun painting the horizon in shades of orange and gold. For the first time in years, Michael felt clarity, a fragile but real sense of purpose. He knew the road ahead would be long and filled with challenges, but he also knew he was walking it with steady, determined steps. Redemption isn't a finish line, it's a lifelong journey. And every step matters. Outside the station, the autumn wind rustled the leaves, carrying them across the sidewalk. Olivia stepped into the golden sunlight, her phone buzzing with another invitation. Another opportunity to share her story, to push for change. No single act can fix a broken system, but every act matters. And sometimes it just takes one voice to start an echo. I hope you follow through on that, Michael. This journey won't be easy, but every step in the right direction matters. Michael nodded, his eyes glistening with emotion. Goodbye, Olivia. As Michael turned to leave, Olivia watched him walk away, a man forever changed by his choices, but also by his willingness to confront them. Outside, the late afternoon sun filtered through the windows, casting warm golden light across the room. Some wounds would never fully heal, but they didn't have to define the rest of their lives. Both Olivia Parker and Michael Hayes had chosen their paths. One step at a time, they moved forward, toward redemption, toward healing, and most importantly, toward hope. Sometimes, the hardest step is the first one, but it's also the most important. Olivia decided to launch a new project called Safe Zone, a training program focused on communication skills, emotional control, and crisis management designed for police officers, security personnel, and civilians alike. At the Safe Zone launch event, hundreds of people gathered. Young officers, community safety professionals, and even survivors of incidents similar to Olivia's experience filled the venue. She stepped onto the stage, holding the microphone, her eyes shining with determination. The Safe Zone project isn't just about self-defense skills or crisis management protocols. It's about how we communicate with one another, how we maintain calm and respect even in the most intense situations. I believe a safe environment doesn't just start with tools and procedures. It starts with people and our hearts. Applause erupted through the room, and Olivia smiled. She knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but she also knew she was ready for it. One morning, Olivia received a handwritten letter from an unfamiliar address. She carefully opened it and began to read. "Miss Parker, I watched your video and read your story in the news. I used to be a young officer, but I quit because of the pressure and mistakes I couldn't undo. Your story gave me the courage to return, to try again. Thank you for standing up, for giving people like me a glimmer of hope, a stranger." Olivia folded the letter, her heart swelling with emotion. Moments like these reminded her that even the smallest actions could ripple out and create profound change. The morning sky was clear and blue, and Olivia stood on the balcony of her new office, overlooking the training grounds where her team was preparing for the first Safe Zone workshop. A gentle breeze brushed through her hair, carrying with it the scent of new beginnings. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and smiled. Every single one of us has the power to create change. All it takes is a little courage and a little patience. In front of her was a new journey. But this time, Olivia knew she wasn't walking it alone. The morning sun filtered through the large glass windows of the Safe Zone Training Center. The spacious area was modern and well-organized, filled with posters and diagrams outlining crisis communication skills, emotional control techniques, and conflict resolution strategies. At the center of the room, on the main wall, stood a large inscription in bold letters, simple yet deeply meaningful. "Change begins with us." Olivia walked into the room, clipboard in hand, as her team prepared for the first session. Her eyes scanned the room. Young officers, security personnel, community leaders, all here to learn, to grow, and to make a difference. She stepped to the front of the room, her voice clear and steady. "Welcome to Safe Zone. Today, we're not just learning skills, we're building a foundation for trust, compassion, and resilience. Together, we can create a safer, better world, one interaction at a time." The participants listened intently, and for a brief moment, the room was filled with hope, purpose, and a collective determination to be better, for themselves and for their communities. Calmness is strength, understanding is a weapon, and integrity is a shield. Olivia Parker stood before a group of fresh trainees, young police officers, security personnel, and a few community members attending the Safe Zone Center's first community training session. Holding the microphone, her warm, confident voice carried across the room. "Welcome to Safe Zone. We're not just here to learn how to defend ourselves or de-escalate situations. More importantly, we're here to learn how to listen, how to remain calm, and how to make the right decisions in the most stressful moments." Applause echoed from the participants. They didn't just see Olivia as an instructor. They saw her as a symbol. A woman who had faced fear head-on, stood against injustice, and transformed her painful experience into an opportunity for change. The training began, filled with interactive exercises, thoughtful discussions, and moments of quiet reflection. Olivia moved through the room, connecting with individuals, answering questions, and sharing insights that felt less like lectures and more like genuine conversations. As the day wrapped up, a young officer approached Olivia, his voice steady, but filled with vulnerability. "Miss Parker, thank you for today. I never realized how much emotions affect our decisions in tense situations. I think this training will save lives, maybe even mine." Olivia smiled softly, her hand resting on his shoulder. Every moment of calm in chaos matters. You're already on the right path. At a community reintegration center for formerly incarcerated individuals, Michael Hayes sat in a small counseling room on a plastic chair. He wore a simple button-up shirt, and though his face appeared older than his years, his eyes shone brighter, free of the anger and pride that once clouded them. Across from him sat Dr. Samuel Turner, the counselor who had guided Michael through his rehabilitation journey. Michael, you've completed your program, and now you have an opportunity to start over. Have you thought about what comes next? Michael took a deep breath, his hands clasped tightly together. I want to do something meaningful. Maybe work with young officers, share my story, warn them about the mistakes I made. If I can stop even one person from walking down the same path I did, then I think it'll all be worth it. Dr. Turner smiled, pride shining in his eyes. That's an admirable goal, Michael. But remember, this journey won't be easy. Some people won't believe you. Others will criticize you. Are you ready for that? Michael nodded, his gaze steady and unflinching. I've spent enough time in the dark. I'm ready to step into the light, no matter how blinding it might be. The following weeks were filled with preparation. Michael began speaking at community events, sharing his story with humility and honesty. Each word carried the weight of his regrets, but also the hope of redemption. One evening, Olivia sat in the back row of a small seminar where Michael was speaking. He stood at the front of the room, his voice firm but vulnerable. I'm not here to make excuses. I'm not here to erase what happened. I'm here because I believe that we can all do better. Mistakes don't define us. What we do after those mistakes does. The room was silent, the audience hanging on his every word. After the session, Olivia approached Michael. They stood together in quiet understanding, two people whose lives had been forever intertwined by one fateful night. You're doing good work, Michael, Olivia said softly. Michael nodded, a faint smile crossing his face. Thank you, Olivia, for everything. As they parted ways, both Olivia and Michael walked forward on their separate but parallel journeys, one of prevention and one of redemption. In the Safe Zone Training Center, the sun set behind the city skyline, casting golden light across the spacious room. The bold inscription on the wall stood as a reminder to everyone who entered, "Change begins with us." Olivia stood in front of the window, watching her team pack up after a long day of training. The sound of laughter and casual conversations filled the air, a testament to the sense of community they had built. She closed her eyes briefly, letting the weight of the day settle in, then whispered to herself, "Every day is a chance to do better, and every step forward counts." In another corner of the city, Michael Hayes walked out of a community center after another session with young officers. He stepped into the evening air, looking up at the stars beginning to pepper the sky. Both of them, two individuals once trapped by fear, anger, and regret, were now walking paths lit by courage, compassion, and the belief that change was possible. And in their hearts, they knew. No act of courage is ever wasted. No step toward change is ever too small. A few months later, at a Safe Zone community security workshop, Olivia Parker prepared to step onto the stage to share her story. She was no stranger to speaking in front of large crowds, but today felt different. As she entered the conference hall, her eyes caught sight of a familiar figure standing quietly at the back, Michael Hayes. He wore a simple suit, standing with his hands clasped in front of him. There was no anger, no arrogance, just remorse and determination etched across his face. After her speech concluded, as attendees began to disperse, Michael approached Olivia. "Miss Parker." Olivia turned around, her expression softening as she recognized him. "Michael, I didn't expect to see you here." Michael nodded, his voice low but steady. "I heard about your project. I want to be part of it, if you'll have me. I can't change what I did, but I can help others avoid making the same mistakes." Olivia looked into Michael's eyes. In that brief moment, she didn't see the man from that fateful night. She saw someone striving for redemption, someone walking a difficult path out of the darkness. "We all deserve a second chance, Michael. Welcome to Safe Zone." They shook hands, a handshake full of meaning, closing one chapter and opening another. Late one evening, Olivia sat alone in her office. The glow of her desk lamp illuminated the room as she pulled out an old notebook and began to write. To anyone reading these words, Life might throw you into its darkest corners. You might face fear, injustice, and even despair. But in those moments, you always have a choice: to stand up and do what's right. You don't need to be a hero. You just need to be yourself, and brave enough to stand for what you believe in. If you ever feel small or powerless, remember this: even the faintest light can pierce through the darkest shadows. With courage, Olivia Parker. She set the pen down, closed the notebook, and gazed out the window. The city lights sparkled below, a reminder that millions of people out there were fighting their own silent battles. Olivia knew her journey wasn't over, but she also knew that every step forward mattered, and every person she helped would carry this story further. Olivia Parker and Michael Hayes, two people once on opposite sides of a tragic conflict, had found reconciliation and a renewed purpose in their lives. Olivia continued to build and grow Safe Zone, empowering people with the tools to protect themselves, de-escalate conflicts, and create safer communities. Michael, once an officer who had stumbled and fallen, became a speaker and storyteller, sharing his experience with raw honesty to warn others about the consequences of unchecked emotions and poor choices. We can't change the past, but we can learn from it to build a better future. Their story didn't have a perfect ending, but it had a hopeful one. A testament to the power of courage, forgiveness, and second chances. 10 years later. A decade had passed since that fateful night in the parking lot of a shopping center. The city had changed, but the echoes of that event could still be felt in conversations, policies, and actions. The Safe Zone Training Center had become a national symbol of innovation in law enforcement training and community safety. Its workshops, training programs, and outreach initiatives had transformed not only individuals but also the very systems they operated within. Olivia Parker was now a respected leader, a pioneer in safety training and crisis management education. She didn't just talk about change, she lived it, built it, and shared it with every person she encountered. In her spacious office, sunlight streamed through the large glass windows. Outside, a group of young people, police cadets, rescue personnel, and even high school students, were participating in a hands-on training exercise under the bright sun. Olivia? The familiar voice of Jason Miller echoed from the doorway. Jason, now the executive director of Safe Zone, held an envelope in his hand. His hair was streaked with gray, but his eyes still carried the same fire and dedication they always had. Olivia turned and smiled warmly. "Jason, come in." Jason approached her desk, placing the envelope down gently. "This came for you. It's from a police academy in another state. They want to partner with us to bring Safe Zone training into their curriculum. It's happening, Olivia. Your vision is spreading." Olivia picked up the envelope, her fingers lingering on the edges as she looked out the window again. The young trainees below were focused, determined, and hopeful. Change begins with us. Every step matters. She looked back at Jason, her smile steady. "Let's get to work, Jason. There's still so much to do." As the sun began to set, casting golden hues across the city skyline, Olivia stood at her window, watching the world below. Somewhere in another city, Michael Hayes was likely giving a speech, sharing his story with a group of young officers. Two lives, once shattered by a moment of chaos, now intertwined in a shared mission: to create a world where calmness is strength, understanding is a weapon, and integrity is a shield. Their story wasn't just theirs anymore. It belonged to everyone who believed in redemption, change, and the unwavering power of courage. No act of courage is too small, no moment of compassion is wasted, and no story is ever truly finished. It simply begins again in someone else's heart. "There's a letter for you." It was sent from somewhere, rather special. Olivia accepted the envelope, carefully opening it. As she unfolded the letter, her eyes scanned the handwritten words. "Miss Parker, today, I received an honorary badge from a group of young officers, the ones I've been mentoring for the past 2 years. They said my story inspired them. But the truth is, you inspired me.